Morning, Chief Constable and senior team, to those here in the room and those watching online. Welcome to the June accountability meeting in public. Our meeting today is in two parts. Sorry, could we just have quiet? Thank you. Our meeting today is in two parts. First half, we will focus on the end of year assessment on delivery of the first year of the policing plan. And in the second half, we will then move on to discuss more general policing matters. But first, I would like to mark with deep sadness the passing of Sir Desmond Ray and to extend the board's condolences to his wife, Maeve, and wider family. Sir Desmond was the first chair of the policing board. Appointed in 2001, he was tasked with delivering the vision for policing outlined in the Patten report, a role he embraced with humility, integrity, and determination. Dedicating his life to public service, his legacy continues to live on through the firm foundations and principles established for policing and policing oversight in Northern Ireland. Policing with a democratic mandate, a community focus, and within the human rights framework. I would now ask you all to join in a minute's silence in his memory, and if we could all stand. Thank you. Chief Constable, thank you for your accountability report, which this month provides an end-of-year report on performance against the policing plan. Over the course of the year in the public session, you have reported on progress to date for each of the outcomes. Outcome 1, that the PSNI is victim focused. Outcome 2, we have safe and engaged communities with confidence in policing. And outcome 3, that the PSNI have a representative, valued and enabled workforce. The in-year reports were self-assessed, and this end-of-year report has been assessed by the Policing Board. These new reporting arrangements seek to enhance openness, transparency and accountability for policing. The outcomes and their performance indicators were agreed between the Board and the PSNI after detailed analysis of the policing environment. And the key highlights of that environment are, first of all, that Northern Ireland is a safe place to live. Crime rate sits at just over 48 crimes per 1,000 of population, and this compares to 85 in England and Wales. But we are also a post-conflict society where the terrorist threat remains, currently sitting at substantial, and the ongoing threat from paramilitaries and organised crime gangs, clearly shown through increased levels of drugs and weapons offences. And we also have seen increased sexual offences, and hence the focus on violence against women and girls, and emerging issues with rising levels of hate crime and cybercrime. All of the above playing out against fundamental challenges in terms of resourcing and the impact that that has on officer numbers and officer health. Numbers at an all-time low of 6,300. Overtime, 1.5 times higher per officer than in similar services. Core staffing no longer sufficient to provide operational resilience, as highlighted by the need for mutual aid in the recent public disturbances across Northern Ireland. A service under severe stress, seen through the levels of sickness across officers. Across the three outcomes, the next slide, there are 16 indicators against which performance is measured, and that performance is measured using a 4-point RIG framework, ranging from not achieving through limited progress to adequate progress to good progress. Turning to each outcome. Outcome 1, that the PSNI is victim focused, with the emphasis being with regard violence against women and girls, domestic abuse, child criminal exploitation and hate crime. All of the measures have been assessed as adequate. In terms of outcome 2, we have safe and engaged communities with confidence in policing. All have been assessed as adequate, with the exception of effectively tackling cybercrime, which is assessed as limited. And that's an area that we may return to in questions later. And in terms of outcome 3, that the PSNI has a representative, valued and enabled workforce. And I should say at the start that this outcome is fundamental to achieving the previous two. Standards of professionalism and conduct and making best use of resources have been assessed as adequate, and representativeness has been assessed as limited. Representativeness looked specifically at recruitment, progression across all ranks and grades, and at retention. In terms of underrepresented groups, there was no difference in retention rates compared to the general workforce. Some progress has been made in terms of progression across ranks and grades, but recruitment remains a challenge. Moving on to the next slide. In this first year of the policing plan, data was not available to report against all of the measures in each indicator. These included attrition rates in relation to the number of offences not proceeding because the victim does not support, satisfaction of the service received from the victims of violence against women and girls and domestic abuse, the level of threat and risk posed by organised crime gangs, comparison with other similar police services, and the measurement of staff welfare and staff satisfaction levels. Now, some of these are due to the timing of official statistics, but others relate to gaps in data collection, and these gaps will be a focus for discussion at the Joint Policing Plan Review Group, which we will convene in July. In summary, across the 16 indicators, 14 were assessed as adequate and 2 as limited, leading to an overall performance assessment in each outcome as being adequate. Now, I know the policing leadership team may be disappointed that there's not a good in there, but I must emphasise that this level of performance, where the service is operating with at least 1,200 officers short, is exceptional. And I place on record the board's thanks to all officers and staff for your hard work and dedication to policing over the past year. I thank you for keeping us safe. Chief Constable, I would welcome your analysis of the past year's work before moving on to questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your remarks. I'm actually going to pass to Deputy Chief Constable Bobby Singleton, who's going to address a response to the report. Bobby.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Chair. Members of the board, before turning to some of the detail that's contained within the 45 pages of the report, forgive me, but I just wanted to take the opportunity just to set out again the finance and resourcing backdrop to this year's report, because it does materially shape what we've been able to deliver. And look, nobody ever wants to just be adequate, if I could say that. And that's despite the ambition of the policing plan and the performance framework. So yes, we do have still though a significant budget, a budget of nearly £1 billion, but we are still an organisation which is significantly materially underfunded for what is ever increasing demand. In 2025-2026, our officer strength, as the Chair has pointed out, fell to our lowest ever levels, some 1,200 officers below even the patent target of 7,500. And in practical terms, that meant that there were fewer proactive preventative neighbourhood patrols, slower response times, which then mean missed opportunities to detect crime. There was strain on specialist units, which I know you've been hearing about in the last couple of weeks in some of your visits. And it also meant that there was reduced investigative capacity. During the period, demand has not reduced either. In fact, the complexity around it has shifted really. We're seeing a continued movement away from relatively lower resource public space demand towards higher complexity, higher harm investigations that are more resource intensive, serious sexual offending, domestic abuse, cyber-enabled crime, and cases involving vulnerable victims and children. And that complexity really does affect everything. It affects the time required to investigate. It affects the level of safeguarding needed, the volume and sensitivity of digital material that has to be examined, and also the support that's required by victims to sustain engagement through the entirety of the criminal justice process. So whilst the performance framework and targets were intentionally ambitious, year one delivery has been constrained by the availability of resources and by the pace at which funding can support recovery and transformation within the service. We have, at least in our view, against this backdrop, still made progress. Often we think some good progress, but the reality is that the scale of improvements we all want to see really are dependent on sustained investment in both people, but also in capability. The report has brought together the information and assessments previously provided throughout the year to the board, committees, and to the 3 public meetings. So you've seen a great deal more detail even than was in the report that's before you today. It has, however, now been supplemented by some published statistical products, namely NISRA and PSNI official statistics, which haven't been available to us during the year. And look, as the Chair said, we've been candid in our report about where data is not yet available, where it's still under development, or where, frankly, comparative benchmarking with other jurisdictions is limited due to differences in legislation, definitions, or even publication cycles. In light of that, as the Chair said, there will need to be a conversation with the board on a number of the impact measures, as already some of these do not appear capable of actually being reported or not reported in a timely fashion, or perhaps even unsuitable to draw performance conclusions from. In terms of the overall demand and crime context, as the Chair set out at the start as well, statistically, Northern Ireland remains one of, if not in fact, one of the most safe places to live and work and raise a family within these islands. In broad terms, recorded crime and antisocial behaviour both reduced again in 2025-26, and these crime reductions were lower than in England and Wales, where there has been sustained investment in policing and in particular in neighbourhood policing. However, we also saw concerning increases in specific areas, including sexual offences and possession of weapons, both at the highest level since the data series began back in 1998-1999. And this came alongside increases in robbery, drugs offences and miscellaneous offences against society. And these trends reinforce my earlier point just about complexity and harm. Turning then to Outcome 1. Under Outcome 1, the report covers violence against women and girls, domestic abuse, child criminal exploitation, hate crime, the quality of service that we provide to victims, and effective outcomes for recorded crime. The key messages from the report include the fact that VOG crime reduced slightly year on year to 21,853 crimes, but VOG does now represent an increased share of victim-based crime. Important enabling work has progressed throughout the course of the year with the VOG action plan, including a stronger suspect-focused approach in serious sexual offences, and preparations have also commenced now for a refreshed violence against women and girls and children, action plan for year 2, incorporating a number of continuous improvement recommendations which have come through the course of the year with the Langdale review and more laterally with Jan Melia's report. And those recommendations have been subject to a gap analysis, and anything that hasn't currently been in the action plan will be incorporated in for the next financial year. Domestic abuse crimes increased to 18,748 and form now 23.5% of victim-based crime, underlining the sustained demand that exists in this area. Our partnership work continued, including the relaunch of the Sanctuary Scheme and the continuation of Operation Encompass referrals to schools. Crimes with child victims reduced to 8,088, with progress described as strengthening structures and governance, whilst not acknowledging the continuing complexity and the need for further development, especially around data and investigative capability. Hate-motivated crime increased to 2,461 incidents, including a notable increase in racially motivated crime, and that's perhaps unsurprising given the events in Ballymena last June. The report notes improving victim satisfaction measures in this area, alongside the continued implementation of the Race and Ethnicity Action Plan, as well as the appointment of dedicated strategic and tactical leads for the plan. Victim satisfaction overall remained broadly stable in 25-26, with 83.8% of victims having reported being treated with fairness and respect, but still only 45.5% reporting that they were satisfied with the manner in which they've been kept informed in respect of their investigations. And again, that is very clearly an area that we need to continue to try and improve with. Compliance with the Victims' Charter, certainly in terms of initial update, remains high, with 92.43% of victims updated within 10 days. But we want those updates to victims to be more meaningful, and that links to my previous point. During year 2, we'll be expanding both the questions in our victim satisfaction survey, but also the remit of the victim survey to better align with the Charter and in line with the policing plan to explore the quality of service being provided to victims of domestic violence and sexual offences. On effective outcomes, the report recognises that outcomes depend on multiple agencies, not just the police service, but it does highlight steady disposal performance and improving file timeliness at 82.3%. And that's alongside the joint work to reduce attrition and to speed up justice, particularly in those serious sexual offences and cases of domestic abuse. In terms of outcome 2, unfortunately, the agreed impact data was currently unavailable for the financial year 2024-25, not the year, apologies. So what is in the report, we're having to rely on effectively the previous reporting period, which was 24-25. But by those measures, confidence remains broadly stable, with 61.4% of people expressing confidence in the PSNI's ability to protect and serve all people. But satisfaction does remain lower among victims of crime, highlighting the importance of focusing on the victim experience. In that same 2024-25 data set, people also continue to report feeling safe, over 90% of them. Response times, which were available for the financial year that we're reporting on, continued to demonstrate that we met our SLA targets, with emergency median response at 11.6 minutes and priority at 33.5 minutes. On terrorism, paramilitarism and organised crime, the Northern Ireland-related terror threat remains substantial. The report highlights the significant amount of disruption activity and reductions that resulted from that in paramilitary-style shootings and assaults, whilst also noting an increase in the number of bombing incidents. Repeat offending reduced overall, but with a small cohort of people being linked to 20-plus crimes, it also showed that they had a disproportionate impact, and that really does support the focus that we've continued to have on targeted offender management and multi-agency reducing offending arrangements. Road safety obviously remains a concern. 56 fatalities in the calendar year 2025 and an early increase in 2026 in our first quarter compared to the same period in the previous year. Cybercrime remains an area of concern, as the Chair has touched upon, and that's a reflection of the pace of the threat evolution, definitional challenges, and the scale of the investment that's required by us in that particular area. We'll touch on this, I'm sure, but significant internal restructuring and capability development is already underway in digital forensics and cyber investigation, but the report is very clear that further work is required, including agreeing a more robust indicator definition for year 2. Finally, then, in respect of outcome 3, the highlights here include the recruitment campaigns, which did continue to attract strong broad interest, with some progress in diversity measures, though representation among appointees remains below merit pool levels in certain categories. And whilst there may well be societal issues at play here, we have to accept that we need to do more in this area. And certainly we have already commenced work to redouble our efforts. And with a further student officer recruitment campaign this year, we'll have an opportunity, hopefully, to demonstrate the impact of that additional focus. Professional standards activity shows a decrease in the overall number of PONI complaints, but increases in the number of investigations, as well as a higher dismissal rate at misconduct hearings. We would say that that reflects both increased reporting, but also more proportionate assessment and enforcement of standards. On the utilisation and availability of resources and wellbeing, attendance management has improved, with officer annual working days lost having reduced from 22.85 to 18.60. So a 19% reduction in terms of the average number of working days lost. And our officer abstraction rate has reduced from 10% to 8%. The report also describes the refreshed workforce strategy and our continued transformation across digital, data, fleet and estate. And while emphasising that the pace and scale of transformation remains dependent on revenue and capital funding. In summary, then, the report shows that despite significant financial and resourcing challenges, we've continued to deliver and progress in year one. We've seen reductions in overall recorded crime in ASB. We've maintained comparatively high levels of perceived community safety and our SLA response performance. We've also progressed key areas of victim focus, partnership working and workforce reform. But the report is also candid, Chair. Demand is becoming more complex. Some harms are increasing. And in several areas, particularly cyber capability, victim outcome measures and representativeness, it's clear that more work needs to be done. Progress against the plan has been constrained by resources and by data and benchmarking limitations, which we will seek to address with the board. But if these aren't feasible, as I've said, then they may need to be removed or replaced in the plan. But that's something that we can discuss together. We would welcome members' questions and scrutiny. But before we do, again, just in closing, I want to acknowledge and put on record my appreciation for the commitment of our officers and staff, without whom none of this would have been possible. The priorities for year two will be to sustain and deepen improvement, to strengthen the measures and data underpinning our assessment, and to continue the transformation and recovery work needed to match resources to risk and to deliver for victims and communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Constable. We'll now move to questions. The first one is from Nuala McAllister.
Thank you. I had two questions. Which one am I going?
Bog.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Deputy, for your outline of their performance rate. And we know that this is a new way of kind of holding the place to account and the work that has been done. And I acknowledge that there is a lot of work that is ongoing across all the different branches when it does come to VOG. VOG is a priority for PSNI, it's a priority for the executive and for society as a whole. But you know, the status is as adequate in terms of what the PSNI is doing. My question is, what more work can the PSNI focus on in the next year to be able to build upon that, so that we can see improvement, particularly given that it is a priority right across executive, government, policing and society?
I know, I'll start. I'll probably hand over to Davey. Bobby might want to come in. I think this is about ensuring that everybody understands the impact of violence against women. I'll talk in my remarks of our adjustment to violence against women and children that we're going to focus on moving forward. And this is a whole systems approach. The plan has been set out for us about what we need to do through the work of Rachel Langdale, the media report. That gives us a number of recommendations, and some of those are themed. But the last board, and I think you're in agreement with this, we talked about a whole systems approach to this with regards to the executive around social care and health. We haven't managed to achieve a position yet, but we're in discussions around making sure that approach to our response against violence against women and children is adopted with that sort of more strategic overview. There are a number of things tactically within the organisation that, and some of the questions later may lend to this, that we're doing. Internally, I know there's been some concerns with regards to Ombudsman's reports, the thematic report that was done in March, and also the calling of a critical incident around behaviours within the PSNI. I hope you would agree that we are demonstrating very clearly a no tolerance approach to any misconduct or inappropriate behaviours. We are a reflection of society. We all know, and I've heard members of this board talk about the challenges of addressing violence against women and girls in society more generally. What I would say, that this organisation, I think more than any other that I am aware of, is currently really addressing this issue with how we deal with people who show any of those sorts of behaviours. Only on Friday of last week, I dismissed 3 further officers, 2 for behaviours that were abhorrent and completely dismissive of any respect towards colleagues in the workplace. So we have got to live and breathe this, not just have strategies and policies. We've got to make sure that everyone in the organisation understands the importance of it. But the roadmap to it, the roadmap is in our strategy that goes into years 3 to 7 now that Davey has updated. I know has worked closely with you. I'm happy actually to set out in writing a whole myriad of what we're doing, which you can comment on and feed back to us. But this isn't a simple answer. There is a complicated number of issues that we're addressing. But can I just bring Davey in?
Just can I ask my specifics to it? Is with misconduct, I'm sure will come up later, but it was more the kind of response, the forward facing response, in particular if violence against women and girls is a priority and we know resources are stretched, will resources also be directed to the very people in the service who deal with that issue every single day, and the rise of cases and all the work that needs to be done? So more of the specifics around the forward facing rather than the kind of internal stuff, sorry, was what I was looking.
No, well, again, just on that, resourcing is a huge challenge. Bobby's pointed out, the chair's pointed out in his opening remarks. There is, I think, and I know members of the board have been to visit the Public Protection Unit, which will be the subject to a number of questions. I think around domestic abuse, some analysis was done that around 80% of that is dealt with local policing response and within our call handling system. This is a whole systems approach within the organisation as well. There's an education piece around this. So we have a process with regards to where we put our resources, and I think we have exemplified best use of resources with the limited numbers that we've got around tackling our priorities. There's a proper system in place now through this process, through this 5-year plan, to make sure that we're applying our prioritisation in the right places. So we know that we've got gaps with regards to public protection, and I say that because board members have been there. We have 167 people in legacy that shouldn't be there. They should be in public protection. There are so many challenges. People will talk to me at this meeting about road deaths and what we're doing about it. This has to be looked at in the round. But I would offer, and we've spoken at this board, Nuala, about the tragic case with regards to Katie Simpson. The response officers who went to that case, the local CID officers who initially responded to that, they're not in public protection. This is about making sure that across the piece, we resource this organisation with the funding we've got in the best possible way to deal with our priorities. And I think the board understands that violence against women and girls, children, is a major priority for this organisation. But can I bring Davey in on expanding on that?
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Thanks, Nuala. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I would just want to place on record my thanks and appreciation for the work of officers in public protection branch for their work every day in respect of these areas of our business. And you will know I've reported to the board in terms of our progress thus far around the violence against women and girls action plan, but there's much more work to be done. And I have said that looking ahead, we are now in the position that in essence what we want to do is align the work around the recommendation from the Langdale report, the recommendation from the Melia report, and indeed the work being taken forward by the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls work in the executive as well, to really refine our action plan moving ahead for the next 3 years of what was a 7-year plan. And that will include at a tactical level, again, looking at our internal standards of behaviour, our internal standards of investigation that pick up on some of the key issues around Langdale and Melia. We also want to build on the work with the DOJ around the DAPOs and DAPNs and finally get those effective, because we've been talking about those for some significant time, and there's a pilot that will take that forward. The next phase of our Power to Change campaign, and work around sort of no prosecutions for rape cases, around scrutiny panels, etc. So some of that outstanding work that we have not been able to deliver totally from the first 3 years of our action plan. So that's the kind of general focus and direction. What I would propose, I would hope that the draft will be with me over the next few weeks. And what I would propose to do is to share that draft with you as a board for, again, your contributions and your awareness, and then bring that forward as our recommendations and launch of our next 3 year of the plan. So I'll totally keep you as a board informed in terms of the progress, and I'm keen to take your views, your feedback, and ensure that that's incorporated in what we do collectively, because as you point out, Nuala, it is a societal issue and I need your help and support in this, and I'm keen to ensure that you are involved in the setting out of our action plan over the next number of years. And that will also involve some recommendations around our partner agencies that we have not been able to fully deliver as yet over the first 3 years. As the Chief had said, the resourcing element, this is a whole system approach. It is wider than public protection branch, but there are certainly strains within public protection branch as well. Currently they are in the region of 60 officers below their established strength, but right across crime, and you'll have heard me say this before, we're in the region of 270 detectives below where we should be in terms of our establishment. But we have a plan in terms of that regrowth, and within that plan there's a commitment to prioritise the need across public protection, because we see that's the key challenge and where much of the threat and risk for communities lies moving ahead.
No, can I add one thing only about the measurement of this? We, as you know, did a cultural audit last year, and I just deal with the internal bit because we asked Rachel Langdale to look at internal and external. So we will follow up on that cultural audit, and things like, would people report inappropriate behaviour? Are they satisfied when they report it with the actions that we're taking? Have people either experienced and secondly, or witnessed inappropriate behaviour? And obviously we talk about the different types of behaviour. Through this 5 year policing plan, we will understand progress we are or are not making on those issues. And finally, I know this is a challenging one, but we need to find a way through it. If I can just talk externally, what we haven't currently got that I think we need is a measure around the satisfaction with regards to violence against women and girls and victims. That's something that is a challenge because of the privacy and contact and security of doing a measurement like that, but we should be able to come up with some way of achieving that for you as well. And I think that's some of the talks that we'll have for next year's policing plan, so that we can see where we are with that as well.
For other organisations that do that, though, the Victims Commissioner and Victim Support NI, so it's important that it's not just like kind of doing it again, but maybe doing it with.
No, so that's why I talk about the whole systems approach. I was at a meeting or a conference recently, yesterday with Victim NI and also the Victims Commissioner, and these are the sort of things that we want to do together, not separately.
Okay, thank you. Move on to our next question, which is from Les Allamby.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Chief, you highlighted the issues around measuring the effectiveness of tackling cybercrime, which has been assessed as a limited progress. And you mentioned the challenges of establishing definitions of cybercrime and baselines for the extent of offences. This measure is focused on online fraud, sextortion and ransomware, among other crimes. And I wonder if you could say a bit more about the specific challenges that you face around definitions and baselines, and then the wider issues there are in tackling cybercrime and how you see those being addressed as we move forward.
Les, I'm going to invite Davy just to answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Les, and certainly again recognising that this was a new measure for us as a police service and also you as a board. So totally recognising that in the measures this year, it was a starting point, and we are keen to build on that starting point and develop both our understanding and on our ability to demonstrate to you and of course the community in terms of how we are tackling cybercrime more widely. It impacts on almost every investigation now, Liz, as you know, and it's not a kind of standalone area. You mentioned some of the difficulties, and if I could maybe refer to sextortion as an example of that. So there is no recognised offence of sextortion. That's, if you like, a term that groups together a number of offences, including blackmail, including online offences around misuse of communication devices, etc. What we have tried to do is group those together in some way that informs our investigative and operational response to that. But we can't stand over the figures in terms of Home Office recording in respect of that because it is not a category of crime. But to give you an indication, you know, if we look at those types of offences that we refer to as Operation Corin, you know, we've seen those grow from 2019 of around 100 crimes in that year, up to a high of 746 of those types of crimes in the 23-24 financial year. And we've seen that start to fall back again in 24-25 to 578, and last year 25-26 to 441. So we've seen that growth up to a period of time, and we're starting to see that fall back again. But those are not Home Office approved definitions that therefore we can't compare against other police forces, etc. So that's just to try and put a wee bit of context around perhaps some of the difficulties in definitions, interpretation and understanding of those. But again, happy to share as much information as we have with the board moving forward. As you know, there are significant plans around our cyber transformation, and we have delivered in terms of if you like the first strand or the first pillar of that, which is really our restructuring of our digital forensics teams to increase those efficiencies. Much of that work has been implemented the latter part of last year and up to the early part of this year, which enhances our gatekeeping, if you like, that submission. Our acquisition team has been developed and put in place now to process computers, phones, and that prioritisation and gatekeeping. We have developed a scene attendance team, again, to try and facilitate the attendance at serious crime scenes to assist colleagues in terms of identification and rationalisation of the devices we're actually seizing, and to put some structures around that that supports our officers in that decision making. And that's supported by station clinics, again, to try and establish a triage process that supports frontline officers in terms of that decision making. We've put in place our analysis and innovation and reporting team, again, providing that in-depth forensic analysis, looking at innovation, new and emerging crimes, and the delivery of that through consistent evidential presentation for court. And again, CCTV, a key issue. Most investigations now will have some element of CCTV. So enhancing our delivery in respect of those, but there's much work still to be done in cybercrime. We have that bid with the DOJ for in the region of £4.7 million for the transformation of those services. We have not received any payment of that as yet, but we have a clear area of work in terms of automation, our platforms, our software, and our continued development of our ability to both measure, provide data, and provide investigative support to those areas of cybercrime. But that's really dependent on that financial support to allow us to continue to develop that area of our business.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Tommy O'Reilly on representativeness.
Chief Constable, I think everyone recognises that improving representativeness in the PSNI is a challenge, particularly in the context of Northern Ireland. Okay, and I'm sort of welcome the Deputy Chief Constable's acknowledgement that the PSNI have more to do in trying to improve those levels. But what I'd like to ask you today is, can you share some of the areas you think that the PSNI can move forward with in the next year? And in particular, can you also give us some indication as to when the board might have sight of the action plan, which has been recommended by the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, that the PSNI develop to improve levels of applicants from members of the Catholic community, from women, and also from members of ethnic minorities.
Yeah, listen, thanks for the question, Thomas. I think, this is an important issue. I've raised it in the last 2 or 3 policing board meetings where I've quoted from section 15.1 and 15.2 of the pattern report, which again, when I gave evidence to the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, I referenced to them when myself and Davey went to London to talk about this issue, and I was delighted that they had included it in their report. So let me just, if I could, just do that acknowledgement again, that having looked back at the last 3 recruitment campaigns, I accept, and I'm very clear, I don't think we had done enough to try to change the number of people, increase the number of people applying for this organisation, and to focus specifically on underrepresentation. And there is now a very concerted effort to do that. And I'll bring Claire in to talk about some of that, but only this week on Monday, and it's something we've been working at with Ulster University, with Johnny Byrne. There's going to be an event with, I think there's going to be about 200 people from across different parts of society in Northern Ireland, to talk about representativeness in the PSNI. What are the blockages? What more can we do? I think many of the political members here know that, having considered the fact that we need to do more as an organisation, and adopting what Patton said at 15.2 of his report around it's everybody's business to do this. I've also met with political leaders, local councillors. I've met with the clergy across different churches. I have had a number of meetings with schools, and we're developing now a bespoke action plan for schools across Northern Ireland, which we'll hope to formally begin to roll out in September as the next school term occurs, when they come back from their summer holidays. I have to say as well, I talk about us telling our story so that people understand about policing. And I don't mention peelers in my remarks, and neither did Bobby, but one of the deliberate elements of doing peelers was to try to ensure that people understood what an incredible and vocational public service policing is. And I think that comes across really well in the programme, to the point that some people, I think, are actually criticising it's too pro-police, but it's just the story of what those officers deal with. And those officers are from different community backgrounds. And I think people will, in years to come, want to be different members of that group of fantastic 7 officers to join the organisation. We have the British Irish Association every year, where both the British and Irish governments come together, and the executive in Northern Ireland, and other civic leaders. And we've actually got a specific element on the agenda to deal with and discuss representativeness of the PSNI, to again highlight and profile the discussion, and to understand what more we need to do. Because there's not a monopoly on good ideas on this side of the table. So there are a whole plethora of things that are happening, and I think it's fair to say there's not a week that goes by that I and members of this senior team are not doing something with regards to the planning of ensuring that we increase our recruitment across those underrepresented groups, but also try to increase the number of people applying for the PSNI. I do want to say a key part of the representativeness around the nationalist community, I still think, is linked to legacy. I think it's linked to this organisation being more open and transparent in our disclosure around legacy issues. And that's not a short-term fix. You will know in the last couple of years, we have taken significant measures to take a different approach. And that continues, and I'm hoping will play out at various court processes that are about to come to fruition, because that will get reported on in a way that's not been reported on previously. And that acknowledgement when we've got things wrong, more quickly that we got things wrong. So the whole list of issues there that I just wanted to set out around the challenges that we've got about representativeness. But it would be remiss of me not just to bring Claire in on some of the more tactical elements of what we're doing.
Thank you. So obviously we are taking this challenge head on, and since our last recruitment campaign, we've set up an attraction and recruitment coordination group, which has representatives from across the organisation, because we regard promoting PSNI as a very rewarding career with great career opportunity is the role of all of our staff and officers. We're absolutely delighted that we've got 230 officers and staff who've now signed up to be part of our school alumni team. So they will be taking forward the work that the Chief has talked about in terms of engagement with schools, and in particular helping young people think about policing as a career at that point in time when they are making choices about what they want to do in the future. We're planning a series of podcasts ahead of our next campaign, and it's a great opportunity for me to tell anybody who's listening that we will be having another student officer recruitment campaign in the autumn of this year, and there'll be a series of podcasts where you can hear from our officers about the type of work that they do and about the career path that they have taken within policing since they joined. And that will promote not just the organisation, but the rewarding role of being a police officer. We'll also be offering familiarisation days where anybody who has any interest in joining PSNI can come along and have a bit of a taster day to see what it is like to work here. And again, the range of specialisms that this role can take you into as you progress. We're building plans to launch a cadet scheme. We know that that will help remove barriers and encourage participation in policing and create more, trust and confidence and openness in what we do and an understanding about what we do. And I think it's fair to say that whilst, we have lots of actions and initiatives, we do, as the Chief has said, know that this requires a whole system approach and the support of society as well. We're also working closely with our external partner who carry out all of the selection activity. So if there are any areas that will help us improve the candidate experience or reduce attrition from any particular group at any stage, then we're taking action to address that. And obviously the role of our MSAs and DSAs have been very helpful in identifying what we should do differently or better. They have encouraged us that our approach has to focus on the fact that policing is a great career choice and it should be considered by all. Of course, we monitor individual characteristics and identity, but what makes our officers and staff exceptional is their skills for problem solving, their commitment to service, their ability to discharge their responsibilities with neutrality and impartiality. And we want to be talking a lot about that when we're engaging. The other part of representativeness obviously is internally. So if we want to have a strong brand as an employer externally, we need to have a strong core internally. And that's why we're investing heavily in all of the work that you've heard about that we're doing on culture, inclusion and belonging, so that our promotion processes internally, for example, have had real positive progress with access to those opportunities, participation in the competition from all groups and underrepresented groups, and the outcomes of those promotion competitions as well.
Sorry, Tommy, I didn't answer your question about the plan. Forgive me. So we will send you that, as we will to the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. I think you've basically heard a lot of it here today, but there's some part of the plan around how we're going to measure that. Obviously, we know from the data who's applying. We do a plan to go out to recruitment again in the autumn to time that with the coming out of Series 2 of Peelers. I just also want to say there are a number of underrepresented groups that we are focusing upon, and that's represented, for instance, our planning in the REAP action plan that we've got around ethnic minority members of the organisation and try to increase representation there. And we will have this conference that the board and ourselves are involved in for the 25th anniversary, which I think again is an opportunity to reflect some of the challenges which are societal with regards to the PS9 representativeness. It's not something that we can do on our own, but we've got to be shown to be doing everything we possibly can.
Thank you very much, Chief, and it's really helpful to hear all of those steps that are being taken to try and improve the attraction of the PSNI as a career. And I'm sure it's an issue that we'll come back to at future meetings, and I welcome the commitment to see the action plan in the near future.
We've a supplementary on this from Deirdre Hargey.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, for that update. I suppose I just want to get below it a bit to understand in terms of what the police can do around representativeness. So I know you said, Chief Constable, that you haven't maybe done enough in terms of the past recruitment campaigns. So it's just what practical internal changes is going to be made or has been made in terms of targeting those campaigns or looking at them then to reflect and to try and change, I suppose, the numbers in terms of people coming forward. And I would also be keen to know for maybe those officers that have left, whether there has maybe been concerns around sectarianism or things like that. Is there understanding and learning from that that feeds into the recruitment campaigns? I'd like to know a bit more info. And the other bit, I mean, in terms of barriers, I would like to know your understanding of what you would understand as the barriers for those different groups. So as you say, from a Catholic nationalist background or minority ethnic, from women, do you fully understand them then, and how do they feed in to the recruitment processes? I mean, I would agree that legacy is one of those big barriers, but also even issues around like stop and search and the numbers in terms of disparity, things like that feed in. I suppose those are the areas that maybe the programme pillars hasn't reflected on. And it might be a different programme then. I mean, I've watched the first couple and it does give you an insight, but it probably doesn't paint the full picture either. So it's just to really get an understanding from yourselves as what you see as the barriers and how you change internal processes as well, to kind of address some of that. Thanks.
So that set of questions there, I think I got to number 6, is probably what will be reflected on Monday evening, actually, at Ulster University and in wider discussions. Like, I met a number of head teachers this week. I lose my sense of timing now. There is a completely different experience, understanding and view of policing by many in the nationalist community to what I'm accustomed to because of the history here. And we have to acknowledge that and understand that. You mentioned stop and search, of course, and I've faced similar challenges with regards to London and young black males being treated in a disproportionate way because of the evidence and the data. This is something that is going to take more than me responding here, but what I would say is the awareness is there, the understanding is there. We have an incredibly vibrant Catholic Guild who we seek advice from and have been incredibly supportive around the recent campaign. The new chair of the Catholic Guild, I know, is engaging widely to try and build up the numbers within the Guild, within the organisation. We're asking constantly what are the barriers, what are the issues with regards to joining the PSNI internally. You mentioned about people who leave the organisation. I know there's been some fairly high profile allegations of sectarianism. I always follow those up, Deirdre, I promise you, and I speak to those individuals. You know of one particular instance, it was probably about a year ago now, where it resulted actually in an apology that the experience that were described were not accurate. And I've spoken to Gerry around concerns that he's previously had. Since I've been here, none of the concerns that have been raised with me when I've explored them, I've found that there was any valid issue around them. But I know there has been some really difficult experiences previously. But as I've said with regards to inappropriate behaviour around misogyny, anything with regards to any form of hatred, any racism, will be dealt with in a zero tolerance way. And I think that confidence in the organisation by people from underrepresented groups needs to be something that we can't take for granted. We've actually got to make sure it's there. And every meeting I go to, every time I speak publicly, I'm advocating for this organisation, asking people to join it. I was at a Superintendents Association meeting last week and engaged with a number of members of the community, and then I'll give my cards out about getting ride-along sorted and visiting a primary school in West Belfast. Every chance I get, I'm listening to what people's experiences and concerns are. And I promise you, some of those are incredibly complex. We won't solve overnight. But I understand the different experience exists, and we've got to try and reassure and show people that this organisation is for everybody. One of the parts, I know Claire mentioned podcasts, is that there's real opportunities in this organisation for everybody. There is an equality of opportunity for everybody. And I think we've got a really positive story to say about the progress within the organisation, both of women and people from across different cultural backgrounds. But we need to tell that story. We've got to get that story out. And that's another thing that we're going to be seeking to do in the next 12 months. But I understand the backdrop to your question. And when I went to the meeting this week, I was confronted with quite a challenge about the perception, the experience, and the lack of trust towards policing. And I am listening around all of the issues that are raised.
Thank you. And Peter has a supplementary on this.
Thanks. The supplementary, I think, has been touched on by yourself and others, but I'll ask it anyway, or make two observations. You came back to the fact that there is going to be an action plan, first of all, so I'm sure we all welcome that. I'm not sure you answered when we would see that action plan, if you could comment on that. And just two observations, one of which you may or others may bristle at a little bit. I really welcome what has been said today. My sense of raising this issue over the last 2 or 3 years was, frankly, that there was a more generic approach to recruitment. And in some areas, with some groups and some people from different backgrounds, the generic approach just will not work. So what I'm hearing is there will be a shift towards more targeted approaches to the needs of recruitment and the needs of a balanced workforce within the PSNI, because I think that's the way to go. And so I certainly welcome that if there's a move away from the more generic. And I suppose in the action plan, I would also hope to see a real emphasis on a whole society, whole community approach to recruitment. This is not just an issue for the PSNI. And I think the PSNI and its action plan needs to challenge others within the community to recognise the importance of policing and play their part in recruitment too.
So with regards to the action plan, I think effectively it's done. There's no reason why you can't have that in a couple of weeks, and the same with the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. So we'll provide that to the board. And I think everything you've said, Peter, I would completely agree with around our intention to be far more intelligent around our focus about trying to change the dials with regards to recruitment, a lot of which Claire's discussed, even our understanding about where people are from who are applying, where the gaps are. And that's part of the prioritisation around some of the work we're seeking to do in schools. But can I just say, this isn't going to change overnight. If in the autumn we see increases in the people applying, numbers of people applying for the PSNI, by de facto, I'm hoping that will include increases, obviously, in those from underrepresented groups. But we need to see the proportions change. And that won't happen in one campaign, but I genuinely believe we are planting trees now for this 5-year plan. This is about seeing the progress that you would expect us to be leading with regards to the representativeness of this organisation, which goes back to the original premise of the Patent Commission report. So you'll get the report in the next couple of weeks with regards to the action plan, if you like, around recruitment. And we'll see the progress over the next 2 or 3 years. But I'm confident that we will see changes because of the work that we're doing. But this won't be overnight. This will take some time. And I think everybody on that side of the table will understand that.
Thank you. And a final question for this section of the meeting is from Nuala McAllister.
Okay, my question is going back to the misconduct and dismissal rates, because we see in the performance the review that the dismissal rate has risen from 54% to 79% in a year. And we have been speaking a lot about, trying to tackle internal conduct and ensure that we can, where we can, accelerate to special case hearings, we will. But I wondered if you might be able to comment, Deputy Chief Constable, on what you believe will give the public confidence in that the PSNI is actually dealing with these issues, given we are seeing now a jump from 54% to 79%. Is it just because you're working harder, or is it because there are more issues to be dealt with?
Yeah, so is it getting better or is it getting worse, to put it bluntly? I think that's a really valid question. I mean, in terms of the dismissal rate, I think first of all, it's probably just worth saying we need to be careful around that. So we've deliberately not made that a target in the plan because the right outcome from a misconduct hearing is the just one, not necessarily a dismissal. But having said that, I do think, if anything, the increase in the dismissal rate is probably a reflection of an improved understanding and assessment of the proportionality of the misconduct that we're dealing with. So when we're sending people to either special case hearings, which the chief chairs, or to hearings which are chaired by the ACCs, it really should be the cases where we think dismissal may be an appropriate outcome from that. So I'd be more concerned if I'm seeing like really low rates of dismissal, and that would raise questions for me as to whether we were getting our assessment right. And in the past, our workforce in particular has been very concerned about an overly punitive regime and things like that. So actually, I tend to see that and view it as a positive, but not something that I would want to fixate on, if that makes sense in terms of future performance. The only other thing I'll say, Nuala, is this was one of the areas specifically that Rachel Langdale said to us we needed to do better in, and that was around the pace of misconduct and our appetite in particular for special case hearings. And we're working the chief very, very hard at the minute. He alluded to it, he did 3 special case hearings just in the last fortnight alone. And we have definitely taken a fresh approach to that and have challenged ourselves. We're working closer with the PPS as well to understand the actual risk of potentially prejudice in any criminal proceedings, because in the past it was the fear of doing that which prevented some cases going to special case hearing. Where we can see evidence within a misconduct case now that is incontrovertible, we will put it in front of the chief at the earliest opportunity, because we absolutely recognise the drain that this is having, not just on public confidence, but even internally in terms of confidence that our own officers and staff have in our misconduct regime. Reflecting more widely on the report in terms of whether I think things are getting better or worse, there was obviously also an increase in the number of misconduct investigations. We have said in the report that we believe that's down to greater levels of reporting and awareness. We didn't just pluck that out of thin air. We do see an increase, for example, in the number of confidential reports, which is definitely welcome. We can also see, if we look back over the last 2 to 3 years, if we go back to the Your Service, Your Voice survey, if we look at Rachel Langdale, and if we look at the Inclusion survey, over time, there is evidence from our own workforce reflecting an improvement in the organisation's intent, their general awareness around standards, and about the calling out of unacceptable behaviours. But to be candid, whilst there is improvement, those reports also very clearly show that the levels of reporting around inappropriate behaviour are absolutely inadequate in terms of the level of reporting at the minute. So there's a great deal more that we need to do to make sure that people are highlighting and reporting these things. So as we look forward into next year, I would suggest that it's likely that the board will see further increases in terms of reporting. I think you'll also see further increases in terms of the dismissal rate. And a big kind of partner in all this for us can be OPONI as well, because we sit down with them fairly regularly and look at our respective caseloads, and we obviously make assessments of our own. But between the two of us, we should be able to offer the board and the public reassurance that things are getting better rather than worse. Or alternatively, if we are seeing a deterioration, we will also potentially highlight that. But for now, for what it is, again, having very recently reviewed the caseload, and even the number of people who are suspended and repositioned has stayed relatively static in the last 12 months. So all that points towards a situation where I think we can say that things are getting gradually better, not worse. But there is also a great deal of work still to do in the forthcoming year.
And thank you for that. Just to be quick, I think it is positive to see that the force is taking that kind of positive action. It's really important that your officers who feel that they want to report something can report, and the professional standards does listen to them, and that no longer do we have the excuse of nothing to see here, or I didn't see or hear anything. Like it's important that people do have the confidence, but it's also acknowledged in the report, I think it's around 4 million spent on salaries where officers have been suspended, and some of those will be suspended following OPONI investigations. So would you, next week in the Assembly, there is an amendment to the Justice Bill to give OPONI, the police ombudsman, the same power that the police have to fast track cases and send them to the appropriate authority and then the Chief Constable. So does PSNI support that additional power to the police ombudsman?
Oh, absolutely. And the whole point is, in those cases, again, where there's incontrovertible evidence that can be used, the sooner we can have those people removed from policing, the better, frankly. So we do welcome that. And the fact that the system is so linear and that elements of it can't work in parallel at the minute is a big problem that's, adding to the really lengthy delays. And again, that was something specifically that Rachel commented on in her report when she described the overall regime as being flawed. So I think that proposed amendment and the other associated amendments that are being made to the Justice Bill will put us in a really strong position, hopefully going into 2027, all things being equal at the executive. But I think all of that will go towards us improving standards of conduct within the organisation, hopefully confidence. And again, that all feeds back into the recruitment piece as well.
Thank you. That completes our review of performance against the policing plan. We'll move on now to the second part of the meeting on more general policing matters. Chief Constable, I'd invite you to make some opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to begin my remarks for this section of the board by paying my tribute to Stesman Ray. As the first chair of the policing board, he brought a calm authority, integrity and independence when confidence in policing was fragile and it was divided. He was a courageous and thoughtful leader whose belief in dialogue and working together helped Northern Ireland move forward during one of its most difficult and challenging periods. He was not a man who ever overreacted to media headlines or ever played to the gallery. He had no interest in populism. He immersed himself in data and always sought solutions, and was a proud advocate for policing, whilst also being fierce in making sure we were held to account. He focused on moving society and policing forward. He'll be sorely missed. So returning to today's policing board business, we saw the risks local officers confront when viewing the footage of the attack against an officer in Downpatrick on Sunday morning. A man aged 36 has been charged with attempted murder and related offences. I'm pleased to say that the officer is recovering well, notwithstanding the severity of the incident. This was not a terrorist incident or as a result of a violent altercation. This occurred simply because of a vehicle failing to stop for police, and because too many people in society believe it's acceptable to attack the police. It is not. In 2025, more than 2,600 officers were assaulted, and we had over 100 incidents where police vehicles were rammed. Each of these incidents should result in the severest of punishments for those involved. This level of aggression towards policing is not acceptable, and it is certainly not part of the job. Support for policing and our officers must be unequivocal. I'll continue to advocate for the most severe of sentences for those responsible. Alongside such frontline challenges, recent weeks saw the PSNI oversee a number of high-profile public events, including the Northwest 200 and the visit of His Majesty King Charles and Queen Camilla to Northern Ireland. These operations required extensive planning, close partnership working, and significant resourcing to ensure the safety of everyone. Hate crime statistics revealed another worrying rise in racially motivated offending. I remain concerned about the malign influence of bad actors spreading extreme and hateful disinformation on social media. There are those in society who seek to use any incident in our communities to create misunderstanding, generate fear, and provoke hatred. I urge everyone to call out and question such hateful commentary wherever they see it. I, like everybody here, was devastated to watch the footage of Henry Novak's arrest and death. My heart goes out to Henry's family, who with great dignity and humility have made clear his death should not be used to create division. Offensive murals, banners and posters have recently been erected in parts of Northern Ireland. These displays contain anti-immigration and anti-Muslim sentiment. It's incumbent on all of us to stand up to all forms of hatred. This month, ACC Davy Beck and Detective Chief Superintendent Zoe McKee updated the Justice Committee on our approach to child criminal exploitation. They underlined our commitment to treating children who are exploited as victims first. They must be seen, heard and safeguarded, while those responsible for exploiting them are identified, disrupted and held accountable. We do not want to criminalise children, and we'll do all we can to prevent them entering the justice system whilst keeping people safe. But as we enter the summer months, I want to appeal to parents and guardians to do everything that you can to keep your young children safe and keep them from becoming involved in such seemingly senseless and dangerous activity. Last week, I welcomed the publication of the Northern Ireland Affairs report on policing and security in Northern Ireland. This report provides yet another opportunity to take stock of the perilous financial situation the PSNI has been placed in. Everyone in Northern Ireland should be concerned about the way our police funding has failed to keep pace with other public services and policing everywhere. It is only because of our outstanding workforce that the PSNI ship has kept afloat, but this cannot be expected to continue. Since I've been Chief Constable, report after report after report from a variety of oversight and governance groups have highlighted the lack of resources and poor funding for this organisation. At some point, there has to be a watershed moment when this changes, and I hope this report proves to be that. We need action to ensure there is a plan to fund the PSNI for the longer term. Despite the ambition of entering 2026 and 2027 with a multi-year budget, we are still operating in the absence of any budget 2 months into the financial year. The implications for financial planning and control are obvious. They are simply unworkable. We have projected shortfalls of 57 million, 92 million and 149 million over the next 3 years. We also continue to carry exceptional pressures associated with the legacy of our past. Those pressures reduce what is available for policing today. It is not right that resources that should be invested in neighbourhood policing, safeguarding, tackling violence against women and girls and disrupting criminality are invested elsewhere. The committee supports my position that these legacy costs are exceptional and should not constrain contemporary policing, recommending a new, recurring and ring-fence funding stream to meet legacy costs within the PSNI. I'm increasingly concerned about the government's one-dimensional approach of focusing solely on the new Legacy Commission as the be-all and end-all for legacy. Without the PSNI being funded to service the demands of this expanding body, the entire legacy project will fail. The detectives and staff currently in legacy should be elsewhere in our organisation dealing with today's problem, not least of which in our public protection branch. During May, I attended and spoke at both the Police Federation and Superintendents Association conferences. These are important opportunities to engage directly with colleagues about the challenges they face and the support that they need. I reiterated my support for the Federation's Let Them Protect campaign, which highlights the reality and impact of assaults on officers and staff. Across both conferences, the message was consistent that society must not tolerate violence towards those who act to protect others. I want to finish my short remarks by providing my own Chief Constable's assessment of our 1 year end of year performance against the 5-year policing plan for the organisation to hear. Frankly, this report evidences a policing miracle being delivered by everyone in this organisation. Just take account that, in my judgment, we're actually circa 2,000 officers short of what we require, against a backdrop of the unique challenges of policing in Northern Ireland, with the vile and persistent assaults against officers and staff, societal challenges regarding police recruitment, the unique terrorist threat seen up close and personally recently at Lurgan and Dunmurry, and with no meaningful budget increase for the PSNI in 15 years. The service being reduced to its lowest ever levels and having to manage the unfunded demands of legacy. My headlines are 44,076 antisocial behaviour incidents, the lowest since the data was collected in 2006 and 2007. 48.7 crimes recorded per population of 1,000 people, compared with 85 per population in England and Wales. Recorded crime reduced by 3.5%, compared with an England and Wales reduction of 1.9%. Public confidence in contacting the police increased to 92.1%, an increase of 20%. Traditionally, this was always viewed as the most important measurement in policing. Over 90% of people feel safe or very safe in the community in which they live. The number of hate crimes per 10,000 population in Northern Ireland is 12.5, the lowest compared with our most similar forces, the highest rate of a force being 37.3 per 10,000 people. Victim satisfaction surveys showing fairness and respect increasing to 85.1%. Improvements in our response times to emergency and response calls. 12 major serious and organised crime disruptions compared with 6 the previous year. Number of shooting incidents and casualties of paramilitary style shootings at their lowest levels since records began. Workforce retention incredibly strong, officers at 94.3% and staff at 93.2%. We're an organisation that welcomes scrutiny and a police service that is beginning to tell its story with pride in our 25th anniversary year. We know we have a lot of work to do, but we're an organisation with a plan over the next 4 years to improve what matters to us most, that being victim focused, communities focused and workforce focused. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Constable. We have 11 questions and 40 minutes in which to fit them in. So that works out at 3.5 minutes per question. So I would implore members to keep their questions succinct, and similarly, we'll get similar succinct answers if we have. Thank you. Our first area is in relation to a recent visit by board members to the Public Protection Branch, and Marian Cree will start.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, we've already talked a bit about Public Protection Branch, and as the Chair said, we were quite a number of us there last week. And my question is in the context of one, being very aware of the overall resource and issues in the PSNI at the minute, but also, you know, not everybody can be a PSNI officer and not every PSNI officer can work in Public Protection Branch. That was very evident last week. So I want to put on record, we were really blown away by the commitment, dedication for the staff that do that job, and really we all felt that on the day. But there were some concerns raised, and basically in the context of, you know, violence against women and girls, you know, there we have a branch, and I know you say it's a whole PSNI approach, but they do the hardcore work associated with it, and they were crying out to us about being under-resourced, which concerned us. And they were giving us very clear examples of their caseloads versus caseloads in other units that do sort of maybe comparable type work. So just wondering if you could comment further. I mean, I have a whole lot I could have said, but there's a few questions to come behind me, so I'll leave it at that. If you just comment what is the plan? And if there is a plan to increase resources, have the staff been made aware of it, or have they just been told it will happen?
Conscious of time, I do want to say and echo your comments and David's that the Public Protection Branch is incredible in what they do day to day, and the actual nature of the work around vulnerable adults, children, and people who are exploited in society, the emotional trauma that they have to endure in dealing with those cases, with their professional determination to do everything they can, is something that I think, again, we need to tell the story. And that's an area that I'm looking at telling that story publicly in the same way that we have with response officers and peelers. I do want to say that we are doing so much in this space with such limited resource. It does feel to me that we've reached a point now where, with the recruitment that we're doing, people will start to feel the positive impacts of officers coming into the organisation. But it's not something that happens overnight with regards to recruitment that we started in April of 2024. There is a plan. I'm going to bring Davey in because he can give you a sense of the across-the-piece challenges that there are. But I do need to emphasise what I said. 80%, I think, of domestic abuse is dealt with outside of public protection with regards to the sort of whole systems approach. They do deal with the really critical cases. And the responsibility that they carry is something that we need to make sure, this will come in a future question potentially, I think, that they get the support that they deserve around them doing that job. That is something that I do want to ensure comes out during this board, as well as the question about the resourcing. But Davey will explain the plan with regards to numbers.
Yeah, thanks, Marian. Thank you to the board for the visit. I think that was very welcome by the team, and that recognition in terms of the commitment, the desire, the belief and the passion they have for that really important area of work. And it is difficult and it is challenging and it's relentless. So I think the fact that you as a board took time to visit is really important, as do I. So yes, we have a plan, and yes, I have spoken to the team and communicated that plan, and will continue to communicate that plan with the team as work continues in that regard. So far, I have, I've made it clear to this board on many occasions around where we sit currently in terms of the deficit and resourcing across crime department. And we have attempted to protect public protection branch to a point, but simply the attrition rates in terms of the loss of officers and the scale of that gap, and if you like, the tail in terms of recruitment and drawing that recruitment through to the specialist departments take time. So we've done all the preparatory work in terms of the processes for a trainee investigators list. So we have a list of trainee investigators that we're starting to draw now. And we've done a lot of the recruitment behind the scenes in preparation for that tap being turned on that Pamela would talk about in terms of resources starting to feed through the organisations to areas such as public protection branch. At the tail end of last year, I secured support from colleagues along the table here for an additional 77 officers to crime department. Over a third of those officers went directly into PPB. That's just about keeping pace, and barely keeping pace with what we're losing out the other end. That's the reality of just people that are coming to the end of their careers and leaving, etc. So that continues to be challenging. So those teams won't have seen significant increases as a result of the people they have been allocated so far. It's just keeping them broadly in check with what we are losing. But we will continue moving ahead to continue to ask for across the organisation all that support into crime department and public protection branch. But that's no mean feat. And again, I wouldn't want to sugarcoat that, both for you as a board, but also for the organisation. Crime department needs to appoint 130 officers by the end of March 2027 to remain as we are, which is a deficit of 270. And if we were to reduce that deficit by 50%, I would need to draw into crime branch over that period of time, this financial year, 265 officers. That's going to be really, really hard to achieve because, as the Chief said, every part of the organisation requires officers requires their slice of the pie, so to speak. So that is going to be challenging, but we have a plan and we will continue to work as a team to develop those officers and put them in the best location for where they are. Demand is increasing in that branch, in that area of work. You know, in the region of 1,600 live investigations underway at this minute in time. There's a further 5,000 files that are pending, sort of further investigative support, etc. And last year we put in the region of 2,000 files to the PPS in terms of prosecutions, and that demand has increased probably about 30% over the last 4 to 5 years. So you can see that continues growth in that demand. So that's where we have identified the need to put people into PPB, and that's the process we are now engaged in. And there's hidden demand even beyond the investigations. You know, the officers within PPB have contributed to over 28 domestic homicide reviews. That's quite a significant and lengthy commitment, but very important in terms of lessons learned and improving both legislative, identifying gaps in legislation, but also in terms of multi-agency responses to the deaths we have seen across Northern Ireland in respect of female homicides. We have around 67 serious crime cases due to go to trial between April this year and November of this year. Again, significant extraction from day-to-day business just to manage. And you've seen some of those trials recently.
David, just to interrupt, and sorry. There is a recognition by the board and by the public protection branch that the resources are scarce. The issue isn't that there are scarce resources. The issue is the allocation of those and the creation of equality of workload. So just by way of example, so you say you got 77 new detectives and a third went to public protection. So the question is, why did a half not go to public protection? And I ask that because we were given an example of a DI who was dealing with 150 rape cases, 60 of which were over 6 months old. So is there any other detective in crime dealing with 150 cases? Yeah.
Could I come in there just?
Yeah, put on your mic. Yeah, do.
And thanks, Dave, for taking us on. But I mean, we are very aware of the resource, and both in human terms and in terms of finance and all of that. There, I wanted to see. It was a very good meeting. It was very informative. I think it was very honest with the public protection branch. But just in terms of criminal exploitation of children, of sexual assaults on children, of physical abuse of children. There was an issue, and I've asked this to the board and so have others a number of times to yourself, and it's about tenure. So it's actually about the welfare of the police officers themselves. So they do a job which I absolutely could never do. They probably need a very strong psychological strength to do all of that. But when we asked the questions, I asked, was there a tenure policy, and they said no. And I asked them, well, what happens in terms of that? They're saying that one police officer would be dealing with 50 cases in that, whereas in CID, they're telling me that one officer would deal for between 3 and 5 cases. So that's the type of things that we're talking about. Also, when I asked about tenure before, I was told, maybe I picked it up wrong, that there was a tenure. Says, but one of these officers or staff, I think it's officer, is known to have done 16 years. I don't even know how it's possible. I know that dealing with and talking to people who deal with this outside in the community sector say that when they deal with a quite horrific case, well, actually it's all cases, but I think it's particularly with quite horrific cases, they have to go. It's not choice. It's not, I think I'll go, no, I'm okay. It's all, they have to go to counselling. And what I'm picking up, because it has been raised a number of times, is that there is no tenure policy. There needs to be a tenure policy. And also they're saying that they could be at 6 months, even when they ask for help, the OHW, the Occupational Health and Wellbeing, that there's at least a 6 month waiting list. And what a number of them do is they go off sick. And we've dealt with sick people, the level of sickness in the force. And to me, that speaks very loud in terms of that. So it's, if you could try and, deal with that, that's what they're telling us. So I'm just quoting what they're saying, not getting it from anywhere else. And the stress of it's obvious, even though I couldn't even describe it. So it's so obvious that they aren't getting that. So that's why I'm coming in after the chair, because what he's pointing at is there's an acceptance of the lack of stuff, but even within crime ops, and I think there's 7 branches or 7 departments of it, this department, which most of us thought, now, we haven't met every other branch. I've met 1 or 2 of them before, but it seems, there's something wrong in terms of using the resource, despite the fact that it's very, very limited.
Can I come in first? Is that right, Chair? Just because
Yeah,
I'm conscious of the time. Okay. So we get into individual cases about individual caseloads is quite difficult, I think, in a meeting like this, because there are a number of other branches within crime, and I do want David to come back. Whether it's OHW and individual cases, we can look at those. All of that is a good news story. There's more investment in OHW in the PSNI than there is in other forces, and we know that from our benchmarking and the Oscar Kilo review that we had. With regards to tenure, again, that's something I know Claire can come into and answer. What I don't want to do is get, and it's a clumsy term, but bogged down. I've been to see public protection on a number of occasions. It's incredibly thought-provoking and challenging to listen to what those officers are enduring. And it's the nature of what they are doing as well. Equally, by the way, I met a community officer recently where he should have 9 officers on his community team and he's the only one. So there are such challenges in this organisation. I'm going to get David to respond to what you said, Chair, but I think this is something that we can do outside of here more precisely and more detail around making sure that we answer questions that you clearly have from what was an incredibly insightful meeting. And I'm very pleased you went there, and the accolades that Marian gave to the team, because they are amazing. But this could go on forever and a day, at my suggestion. David.
Just before David comes in, I think Linda had a supplementary just alongside Gerry's.
Yeah,
and then David can come in.
Sorry, again, in the interest of time, because it links in rather than you having to answer the same thing twice. Just in relation to what we've already heard, and David, you've already referenced the plan to address the need within public protection branch. So there's a recognition that there's a need, and I know there's a recognition across other parts of the service as well, but there is a recognition of need within public protection branch, and I think we need to recognise all of the different areas. This is about offender management and all of those issues as well. That's about prevention. That's about prevention of further harm. There is a recognition, we've all recognised, spoken about it already in this meeting, that across government, across PSNI and other public services, statutory, voluntary, community, there's a recognition violence against women and girls is a societal issue and we all need to deal with it. But it very much comes into this branch, very much around that offender management, very much around the victim satisfaction stuff we talked about earlier on in the first session. And we really need to get an idea around this. So really what I want to know, Davy, is can we get a sense, you talked about whenever we do this further recruitment, that there is going to be a focus on public protection branch and the prioritisation of that. So you're not going to be able to answer this today, and I agree with you, we can't get into the detail of the figures this today. But what I want to know is when will we, how will we, or where will we get the answers to those specific questions? We need to get the detail of that going forward so that we understand that it is being prioritised, because Gerry's right, what these officers are having to deal with, what they're having to say is really, really difficult stuff, and there will be burnout and there will be PTSD, and we end up then picking up the price for that somewhere else, which we already know, and we don't want to end up in that situation going forward.
Okay, thank you. I think your time limits are well out, Chair, but I'll certainly try my best. So in terms of the workload, and every branch will have a different approach in terms of the workload, the types of cases they sit with. That's what I was giving you an overview of that. I mentioned there's around 1,600 live cases, live investigations, but around 5,000 that are still within the book, so to speak, in terms of cases that are waiting further evidence. So there's a differential between those that are live, require active investigation, and those that are parked pending further evidence coming to light, etc. So I think there's a slight difference and differential. So I wouldn't want to unnecessarily unpick that, but we do monitor, we do keep track of, and we do kind of keep a focus on the overall workload. There's been some innovative work done with PPB in terms of the closing of cases as well, because I think, quite frankly, there's far too many cases are kept open for too long, and that's because of the desire, the passion of those teams to try and keep those investigations live for as long as possible. But I think we need to be pragmatic in terms of decision making, because, as you allude to, Gerry, it's not good for officers to have multiple cases open at a time. So I think we need to organisationally own that risk better and take it off some of the individual officers and supervisors around that. And that's the work we're doing with PPP at the minute. Sickness levels were mentioned, and certainly we have done significant work with Claire and her team in OHW. The screening of officers in some of those key roles, including PPP, has just started. And for me, that may well result in short-term an increase in sickness, but I think that would allow us to identify some of those issues early and get support for those officers earlier, and therefore over time reduce the period of time that officers are on the sick. So I think that's a really positive, and I think that's a more informed approach to the tenure position than just putting an arbitrary level of 3, 5 or whatever years. There's officers that are committed to that branch and want to remain in that branch, but I accept there's a balance in this, and we organisationally have to consider that issue. And certainly with OHW team, I think the screening will provide us with a mechanism, a scientific mechanism to address that and bring forward some clear recommendations in respect of that. I welcome Linda's comments in terms of the prioritisation of resourcing, and I hope my colleagues along the table are listening to that as well. But I'll work with the rest of the team. Everywhere needs, as the Chief says, it is a whole systems approach. And you've only to look at the case that was in court yesterday, and you see the evidence of the outworking of that whole systems approach, where officers responded, made initial arrests. That was followed by detectives from our serious crime branch coming in and responding to that, and ably assisted by officers in cyber team that made the real breakthrough in terms of the alibi, etc. So I think that's a really good example of the need across the organisation to actually help and support FOG. What I would say is the prioritisation is more than just resourcing. That's what our action plan is about. That's also as an organisation at a strategic level saying, here's what we're going to do around FOG more widely, how we're going to emphasise and reinforce that whole system approach to FOG, but also in terms of learning, training, development, CPD, multi-agency responses, all of which will fall under the action plan and be prioritised as a result of our commitment to FOG. So it's more than just the resourcing element. And I think a combination of those issues are what the officers in PPB will need to see over time in terms of that fruition that hopefully reduces the kind of inflow to the branch in terms of the demand and the workflow. And I think that's probably very briefly covered the majority of the comments.
Thank you, David. I want to move on now to race hate crime and a question from Peter Osborne.
Thank you. You mentioned, Chief Constable, the issue around Henry Novak, and I think would all echo your comments. The family there must be just going through an unimaginable amount of pain at the minute. I found the video piece in the news really hard to watch. But it leads me into a question, I suppose, two sides of a coin, which is, there is news that the National Police Chief Association or the Council are re-looking at the wording around race action plans. And I wonder if there are issues there that you or the PSNI need to explore around the race and ethnicity action plan. But I suppose also in the context of where there's GB or here, I don't believe any person leaves the house, including police officers, looking to harm. I think it's quite the reverse. And I think we should acknowledge the positive work here that police officers do, despite what impression may be given in the media. The second part of that, the other side of the coin, is your report shows that race hate incidents and crime from a very high level are getting even higher, both numerically and proportionately. And I can tell you what I hear from ethnic minority communities are a number of things at the minute, but I hear at least two things. One is an appreciation actually of the outreach that PSNI at a senior level in an area basis are doing with ethnic minority groups. But I also hear people are anxious and fearful of what's going to happen over the next number of months. I even hear of people storing food in the house. So let me just be clear what that means. There are people, because of the colour of their skin, believe that over the summer they may be so frightened that they or their families will not leave the house for long periods of time. You mentioned bad actors, whether it's banners appearing where the legislation is clear about removing it, or whether it's people on social media or any other manifestation of that race hate. How are you preparing for the summer? Do you have thoughts of what the summer may lead to, and how are you preparing to counter whatever those bad actors have in mind over the summer?
So I'll take it in the sort of bite-sized chunks. This firstly, your question with regards to the National Police Chiefs Council reviewing their wording of their action plan. We're doing the same. We want to do it in slow time, but at initial look, Bobby and I looked at this yesterday. In light of the tragic events that we've seen, our Race and Equality Action Plan describes increasing representativeness, improving outcomes, and being anti-racist. And it's framed within a language of fairness, equality and inclusion, and trust, and doesn't have the terminology of the MPCC action plan. So it appears to be different. We appear to not have gone in the direction that they have gone. And I think that was a result of some of the discussions that the board might recall that we had. And we had a launch of that action plan some 12 months ago now, almost 12 months. A lot of consultation went into that. So we think we're in a different position to the MPCC. I just want to say I really welcome your remarks around people going to work to do their very best. And policing is an incredibly challenging profession, as every member of this board knows, and certainly everybody on this side of the table, but not least of which the rank and file every day, because they never quite know what's behind that door at that instant they're going to turn up at. To give you a sense of the sort of efforts, I suppose, almost to criticise, we have a really good relationship with our ethnic minority communities. I meet them regularly. We've had some really difficult major disturbances in the last 2 years. I've spoken to this board about me meeting families who weren't reporting activity against them and never had, because there was an acceptance of it. And now they are reporting that. But I am concerned about events in the summer. The increase in reporting interest has led to a number of the people I know who are community leaders in that space being contacted by media outlets about a story that the PSNI is not doing enough. And they've called me to say, we've told them, John, you're the only ones doing anything, which is an interesting and refreshing piece of feedback from community leaders who previously might not have felt that they did have the relationship and trust with the police service. But here I think we have got a really good, positive relationship with community leaders from those diverse communities that have been subject to attacks in August of 2024 and June of last year. There is a meeting that we're having with our communities because we're always alive to incidents elsewhere, not necessarily just in the UK, but globally, that can cause a blowback and tensions, and particularly that can manifest itself in disorder in the streets of Northern Ireland. So I'll bring Ryan in. Ryan,
no, sorry.
Oh,
really, just don't.
Well, we are having a meeting with community leaders next week, we are reaching out to them through a strategic engagement group. We're very alive to it, Peter, and I'm happy to speak to you away from this meeting to explain that. And I do have some real concerns because of what I've seen happen this week, but we are ready for it and we're reassuring people.
Okay, folks, I'd really ask you to work with me on this now, or we won't get through the questions. So I need succinct questions and answers. And our next one on the same topic of race hate crime is from Cheryl Brownlee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Chief Constable. I suppose I just want to raise serious concerns that have been presented to me about incidents involving bladed weapons. And you will know about the Hazelbank incident, you will know about a recent one on Ravenhill Road in Belfast. Members of the public were there, they were with their families and young children were present, and footage that I have seen shows that knives were openly visible. This is deeply alarming for anyone to witness. And there are people that are genuinely concerned about this. So my question to the police then is, what action is being taken in response to these incidents? What measures and of course engagement with all communities has taken place or will take place? And will the police in response be consistent regardless of who is involved? And most importantly, what advice is being given to the public if they encounter someone carrying a bladed item? And how will the PSNI ensure all people feel safe in public spaces? Thank you.
Chair, I'm going to hand this to Ryan and we'll do a written response to keep it brief for the benefit of the Chair and the board. Ryan.
Thanks, Chair. Just to reassure you, hoping those listening, our approach will remain the same across any such reports of people with knives as it was in relation to the reports at Hazelbank. So we'll attend, we'll assess, we'll take action as necessary, and we'll investigate, which is what is happening in relation to Hazelbank. I'm aware also of those online reports that you have mentioned, Cheryl, as well, and likewise actively investigating what happened, where and when. So I just want to be really clear that our role remains investigative, trying to understand what has happened. Are there any offences? And that's what we're doing actively in relation to those. More generally, as always, if members of the public are seeing someone with a bladed weapon, ring us and we'll come and we'll deal with it as we should. That's absolutely our role. So I want to say that without equivocation. There was a lot of speculation around the incident in Hazelbank and the others. And indeed, some of those things that you see circulating, I think there was one I was made aware of circulated last night where pretty content didn't happen, and we put information out to say no, that has not occurred. So there is a risk that there's sort of misinformation around this, which heightens tension. So I'd really encourage people to take what they see with a pinch of salt, try and fact check it and cross check it before they jump to judgment in relation to it. Sorry, Trevor, you want to just to sort of conclude on it, we are actively investigating those. There have been significant discussion around it publicly. That's why we've done a lot of engagement locally in Newtownabbey, with political representatives, with community representatives in and around Hazelbank, and actually with representatives from the Belfast Islamic Centre and others, just to help have those conversations, explain what we've done and why we've done it.
Thank you. A question on a similar topic from Nuala McAllister.
Yeah, I guess it's just a supplementary from that, and I think it was right for the police to seize the weapons at Hazelbank, and I do think that there is perhaps cultural issues there that people need to be aware of and educated on too. But am I right in asking that there also are notification issues? Because if you're notifying that you have a ceremonial weapon or sword, as we know, many organisations such as the Orange Order carry swords during parades, that there is a difference for notifiable whenever you're carrying a weapon, and also for religious purposes. From my point of view, I'd much rather there was no swords and knives being paraded or carried around on the streets. But I think it is right that there's an education piece there culturally, that, about having knives in parks. It's not a good look at all. But also I think it is important that this incident is not used, just like Henry Novak's parents had said that they didn't want his death to be divisive. We should make sure that their further incidents aren't used to fuel hatred. And whether the murals that have gone up in Newtownabbey, are they being treated as hate crimes, hate incidences? What's the difference? and how can we make sure to protect the public there so that we don't have any further escalation?
Thanks, Neil. I'll try and, there's a number of questions
I
there.
think we focus on the murals in particular.
Okay, yeah, happy to do that, Chair. Thank you. If Neil, if you're happy, I'll focus on that element of it. So, and very timely, there's obviously been a number of public displays recently and posters that have been well publicised. So when considering sort of public displays of material, we start with a balancing act of freedoms of expression under Article 10 of the Human Rights obligations, and then looking at Article 8, which is around prevention of crime. So there are occasions when material might be offensive, provocative or upsetting, but may not cross a criminal threshold, may not be a crime. So some displays maybe to us all feel to be abhorrent, but they may not tip the scale. So there is no right to be offend or not to be offended in law. So we go through an individual case by case assessment in relation to these. Firstly, to establish if a crime has been committed. So typically we look at offences such as criminal damage. So if material has been put onto a wall, for example, and caused some damage in relation to it, or whether indeed the content of it triggers some specific offences, say for example the under the public order legislation or others. Such as the Public or Protection of the Person and Property Act, for example, to name but a few. And so where we identify that there is a crime, then we will investigate that to see if we can find an offender in relation to it and to bring them before the court. I think it's important to note, so when we talk about hate crime, and here in Northern Ireland that means a parcel of offences that are motivated by hate. There is no specific hate crime legislation here in Northern Ireland, and the Minister is seeking to bring some form. We're working closely with that because we believe that would be helpful here. And we deal in reality with a range of crimes that have a hate motivation. So, for example, recent graffiti you might have seen on Abbott's Cross. So that was recorded as hate-motivated crime. And in that case, the words "locals only," one warning will be burnt out, where the crosshair was daubed on premises, and that's in a crime of criminal damage motivated by hate. And we're seeking actively to bring offenders to justice for that. And if we bring someone to court and there is that hate motivation determined, and our job as investigator, obviously it's the court will do the prosecution, that allows a judge to then take that into account in sentencing. It's an aggravator. So the crime is criminal damage and the aggravation is the hate motivation that the judge would take into consideration. So again, a very real-time example, the mural at the Doak Road in Newton Abbey. We've assessed that as crossing the threshold under Article 9 of the Public Order 1987 legislation, using words or behaviour displays, written material. And 2 people were cautioned, both in relation to that offence and criminal damage, to allow our investigation to take place in relation to that. I mean, ultimately, our judgment will be tested both by the PPS as to whether we've got it right in terms of the crime has been made out, and then laterally in the courts as well. As I say, our job is around the investigation, the prosecution, and punitive element are with the courts. Most recently in Rathcoole, our local neighbourhood team became aware of posters, you might have seen them, with eyes and lamps post a very sinister message beneath those, which again have been judged as stirring up hatred and crossing that threshold. And indeed one of those, which was easily accessible, has been removed by us in line with that policy. So we do take, it's very much a case-by-case basis in relation to it. Alongside that, you'll be aware in January of this year, we launched our service instruction on public displays and emblems, as in a guide to our staff and what they do when they find those. And the obligation of those primarily remains with the landowner, and we will write to those. So since January, we've written about 20 letters to landowners in relation to our, articles that are on their premises or street furniture, and indeed on a number of occasions have taken some of those down that have been crimes and we've been easily able to access, such as the posters I mentioned in Rathcoole, posters at Newry Courthouse, just to name a couple.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to a question from Trevor Clarke on protests in Belfast.
Chief Constable, for a number of weeks now, and I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I raised this in the Assembly about the protests in particular outside the Zara shop in Belfast, about obviously some connection between them and Israel. Whilst I was listening to your words earlier about obviously trying to work with people, what are your officers really doing to help the business of Zara, the employees who are intimidated now on a weekly basis? I seen last Saturday past, officers were there, but they closed the people into the shop and put the shutter down. And I don't think that's misinformation, because that's clear to see on social media. So the officers discouraged people from leaving the shop. I actually believe they're encouraged to go out the back door. So I'm not sure that that's leaving a free society. It's a free society for everyone to enjoy the high street, and it's clearly intimidation of the workforce that's actually within the Zara shop itself.
So I've not got the detail to answer that question. I didn't know that was coming, so I can't give you very much personally. I don't know if Ryan can help with that.
Well, on the speak more generally, firstly, in terms of protests, you'll know within Belfast pretty much every weekend and many days there are protests in some shape or other around the city centre businesses, and the local neighbourhood team have got a really strong relationship, I think, with the business community there. The reality is they make dynamic decisions around what are often quite challenging and emerging issues. Sometimes they'll know about it well in advance, other times it will just happen. Often you see it in social media. It might not look clean, it might not look perfect, but on that occasion they've tried to work as closely as they can with staff to get, I think, what is a sensible and safe solution to these things. But more generally, they are talking to and will continue to talk to staff in Zara to make sure they feel safe. Trevor, in relation to those issues, it's part of pretty much daily policing life now within the city that they're responding to issues such as that. So we're very alert to it, aware of it. We understand it's disruptive, and that's just the balancing act that we try our very best to manage in what are often quite difficult circumstances.
Notwithstanding the difficulties around this, Ryan or Chief, these people are conducting illegal behaviour, and those who are at the receiving end of that are now the ones that are being punished, because shops are closed. I presume staff could be sent home early, losing pay. Ultimately, the ones who are committing the offence, this causing the intimidation of the shopkeepers, those are the ones at the attention that the police should be targeting. So really what I'm trying to find out, when are you going to start to approach those who are causing the offence rather than those victims of the offence?
Can I just say, Chat, only I'm sure Ryan's across this, Trevor. Sorry, I wasn't aware of this one. If we could talk off table and I understand the issues, then perhaps we can help you. Is that okay, Chat?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question is from Frank McManus on vehicle fleet.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is about resource, but it's not of the human resources, we're glad to hear. It's the mechanical resource. I'm interested in the fleet that you have and the current status of that. And I will take a written response in this, because I'm keen to find out those vehicles that are land for a better use of a word, about yards in need of repair, need of maintenance, need to get MOT'd to get back on the road. The last time we spoke about this, there was quite a sizable chunk of the fleet weren't able to be used because they needed some sort of mechanical repair, body work, whatever. And then that incident there was last week was somebody taking control or taking control of a police vehicle, for a better word. That vehicle is probably off the road and could be off the road for quite some time. So I'm keen to understand what's the current state of the fleet and what it would take to get the fleet back to full operational basis.
I think this is again about investment, but to save time, I'll bring Mark straight in on some of the data for you, Frank.
Okay, thank you, Frank, for bringing attention to, I suppose, an area which is often overlooked. By way of summary, we have about 2,600 odd vehicles, average age of around 6 years. And to be candid, as we've expressed in our strategy, it's a little bit bigger and a little bit older than what we consider would be ideal for an efficient fleet. And within that, of course, there's variances. So most of our frontline, I suppose, liveried vehicles, which are in communities, are reasonably young, about 4 years on average. But actually in other areas, maybe smaller, more specialist, even with armoured vehicles, the age can be up to 14 years in average. So there's quite a disparity. In terms of target availability, we aim to have 90% of our fleet available on any given day, and currently it's around 89%. So it's actually almost there, but it could be better. And that means that we have about 280 vehicles parked up for reasons of services, damages, repairs, in any given day. So there are two real challenges really to us improving that. One is shortage in staff, because we only have about 60% of our complement of mechanics, and that really represents challenges across the industry. So we have problems recruiting and also retaining staff, and we have taken measures to address that. So we've had a regrading exercise. We've looked at the timelines for vetting and allowances and apprenticeships and so on. So we're very much leaning into that. So we want to improve the number of mechanics that we have. And then secondly, as you've highlighted, I think, Frank, in your question, we need resources, we need funding. We have an ageing fleet, and it does need addressed. And in the current year, just by way of example, we want to replenish our public order fleet, and we have no funding in which to do that. And I know that the Chief Constable is leaning in hard around the executive for those funds, but also at Westminster, particularly in those areas where there's specialist vehicles or reflect our circumstance here. So anything that the board can do in that area would be most helpful, but we can certainly provide more detail by way of a written answer, Frank.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Question now from Colin McGrath on freedom of information processes.
Thanks very much, Chair. I wanted to bring Chief Constable to the attention the challenging issue that's facing Elaine McNally, who's the daughter of Gerard Higgins. Mr. Higgins was brutally assaulted in a sectarian attack in 1973, headed up by the state agent Brian Nelson, an attack which he never fully recovered from and in fact died from shortly after. Now, Elaine has asked the PSNI for the ballistic history of the weapon used in the attack on her father, and despite your own words that Brian Nelson was a good example of when to depart from neither confirm nor deny, she was actually met with a PSNI response of neither confirm nor deny. So I'm aware that party colleagues of mine met with yourself or with the PSNI legacy team in the 26th of January, but today they're still waiting a review of the decision of neither confirm nor deny. So can I ask you when they might be likely to get that response?
Well, I'll be brief, Colin. I need to go and look at that. Firstly, my sympathy goes to Elaine, because I know these things can be devilishly frustrating when computer says no. Obviously, the history of Mr. Nelson, I have some detailed knowledge. If you give me the grace of speaking to me off table, I will look at that for you. Is that okay?
Yeah, and I would be quite interested as well to find out about maybe some of the other agencies that you maybe would interact with whenever you're trying to determine and neither confirm nor deny. Would that include Ministry of Defence, MI5, others? And is there a way for us to be able to determine what the criteria might be for determining if it's a neither confirm nor deny decision?
Just conscious that the chair will glare at me about time. Is this about freedom of information requests and getting information and the response?
Well, it would be, because if they're asking for information that you hold and you use neither confirm nor deny to not give that information, that would be under that territory.
Yeah, so the application of NCND in these cases, I think, is inappropriate, because that's not the actual pure sense of NCND. It's a national security issue. I think it's clumsy to describe a response like that. I think it misleads the requesting person as to why that has not been granted. So we would speak to other agencies, but we're responsible for our material. That's what I would say on that. And I'm sure, and I'm very happy for you to come and meet the head of our Freedom of Information Unit to talk about how these things work around, the transparent approach that we have around how we do business. And specifically, I'll talk to you about Elaine's case to see if we can unlock it. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Final question is from Cheryl Brownlee on the Red Bull soapbox race.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable. Look, I do welcome all the successful events that you have done, but I must raise concerns about the Red Bull soapbox race, which presented really serious safety and traffic issues for residents. Now, I understand that Stormont Estates were actually in communication with PSNI's event team in Belfast, and this was confirmed by the Finance Minister to an Assembly question to David Brooks. So my question is, why was there no effective traffic management plan in place? What failed in terms of coordination and communication by all parties? Thank you.
Well, I think I might have to come back to you on that one, I'm afraid, because I'm looking at Ryan and he's looking. What is that look, Ryan? If it's all right, Chair, can I, because I remember the prep for it, I was aware of this. I was hoping to actually attend it myself because I thought it'd be quite fun to see it. But I will come back to you. I do not know. Nobody's raised it with me. We would obviously ordinarily for any event have some sort of traffic management plan if that was required. So let me come back to you on that one as well. It would help me to know in advance around some of these questions. And I mean that in a sensible way so I can give you the best answers I possibly can. But I will come back to you. I promise. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Constable. That concludes today's questions. But before ending the meeting, I'd just like to make a couple of closing comments. First of all, in relation to the Downpatrick officer attack, the board welcomes the widespread condemnation and that an arrest and a charge has now been made. We are absolutely agreed that all attacks and assaults have to be universally called out, challenged and eradicated. It is not part of the job, and we trust the officer injured makes a full and speedy recovery. In relation to the visit that board colleagues made to the Public Protection Unit, which we've had a number of questions here this morning, can I first of all say that it was inspiring to meet the officers and staff working on very difficult cases involving rape, sexual abuse, child protection and exploitation. It reinforced the pressures on teams working in this area, the support they receive given the issues dealt with, the risks carried by the unit, and why investment in this area is so important given the vulnerability of victims, and the board's concern that resource allocation is not at the level required at this time. As we enter year 2 of the policing plan, alongside the policing plan reporting arrangements, the board will wish to see the embedding and implementation of the recommendations from the Langdale and Melia reviews within the Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan, and I know that's something that you're actively working on. Further reduction in officer and staff sickness levels arising from enhancement of line management and welfare support. Investment in first line manager training to lead on culture and standards, and reduction in abstractions from neighbourhood teams to reflect the additional officers coming through recruitment, and which is fundamental to maintaining community confidence in policing. We've also discussed representativeness, which is key, I believe, to legitimacy and remains a challenge. It is perhaps the one aspect of Patton which remains unachieved. Chief Constable, you will agree that more is required from the PSNI to respond to this challenge, and we welcome your confirmation of accepting the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee call for a fresh action plan. However, this is not a challenge which can be met by the PSNI alone. There is a need for an open and honest conversation across civil society as to why barriers remain to joining the police for some sections of the community. And the board will take the opportunity of events to mark the 25th anniversary of the new arrangements for policing to facilitate that conversation. And finally, to another recommendation of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee report, and one which you have also referred to earlier, the recommendation that legacy funding be ring-fenced and removed from the PSNI. The onus is now firmly on the Secretary of State to deliver, as it is clear to everyone that the PSNI is being damaged financially and reputationally by the failure of the Westminster Government to provide funding for this exceptional cost. So thank you, Chief Constable, to you and your team for your answers to our questions today. Thanks to those who have joined us here in James House and to those joining online. That concludes today's session, and our next scheduled board meeting is on Thursday, the 2nd of July.